So I was intending to resume video making in the new year, but I thought I would make one about this topic because it seems quite important. Namely, you may be aware that a kind of civil war has broken out within the GOP. The Maga movement is currently at odds with Elon Musk, who some are starting to think is behaving more like the president than just an ally to the president. And in this case, it's because of the immigration issue once again. And Musk arrived in the US and made his way in the US through the use of H-1B visas. And so for that reason and for other reasons, he defends them as really important. These are visas that allow people to come and live in the US, particularly when they're highly skilled. And this is something that the tech section of society takes advantage of to bring engineers from India, from Europe, from everywhere. Trump has talked about this in the past. At one point he was for them, then during the pandemic he stopped them, presumably to prevent who knows what, but the last we heard of that from him was that he was not for them. But before that he was in favor of H-1B visas. And so now the Maga faithful, as represented most vocally by Laura Loomer, you may know who she is, a first-class conspiracy theorist that was linked to Trump during the election campaign, and then he basically pushed her away as far as it being very public, which it had become. But she nevertheless has remained the big supporter, and she became very strident in the last few days, attacking Musk on X, which is his platform, and this led him to block her. And this is nothing new with Musk. He is Mr. Free Speech, but when push comes to shove, it's whatever free speech he likes. And so if he doesn't like it, he has no problem blocking all kinds of people, even though he encouraged the MAGA movement on X during the election. In fact, that was probably his most important tactic, all the disinformation that was flowing on X through MAGA. But now we've got Laura Loomer challenging him on this idea that he wants to promote immigration, and MAGA, in the purest sense, wants to stop it all. They want no immigration, legal or illegal. And allying with her, Steve Bannon, who on his podcast has been saying that he thinks this is a betrayal. And then we have people like Joe Rogan saying the same thing. But meanwhile, Trump has agreed with Musk, and he is saying that he thinks H-1B visas are good. Now, problem is, Musk didn't just advocate for these visas. He was just as strident in his pushback, and he said some really awful things, including agreeing with a post in which someone was labeling the MAGA faithful using the R slur, which of course is a pretty big insult. And on top of that, Musk told them to go F themselves in the face. I mean, really, really harsh language. And so I don't think this is something the MAGA faithful, and there are many millions of them, are going to forget anytime soon. In the meantime, Trump agreeing is probably, at least in part, because although he wants his base to love him and support him, he's also in love with money itself, and Elon has a lot of money, and so at the moment he seems to be tilting in his direction. But I wonder if it'll continue, and for how long. This will be very interesting to watch from the astrological perspective, because we know that Musk in February is dealing with a lot of Saturn as a result of Saturn squaring his natal Venus that whole month pretty much. And it's quite accurate in reflecting the immigration issue, because Saturn is transiting through Pisces, but Pisces in Musk's chart is his sign of immigration. It's the 9th. Foreign affairs, immigration, all of that. And indeed, you could go there also for that axis. The 3-9 axis is the place of immigration, but also documentation related to immigration. That would be the 3rd, which is the opposite of the 9th. Saturn opposes that. So it's a perfect reflection of what is going on. But typically Saturn going through there is more likely to show up as a problem, as a takedown. And I mean, it could be enough all by itself to take him down completely, so that he would no longer be an ally of Trump, would have no effect in the way that he's been having a major effect in the last while. I think that that's unlikely, just because of the tremendous influence he has in terms of power, money, and the major asset that he is to Trump. But this also tells us that there's now a major rift in the alliance, of the within the GOP, and this would have to be considered a good thing for the Democratic Party. The best progress is often made through the Latin adage that says divide et impera, which means divide and conquer. If your opponent is divided within itself, it is not going to help them. And this kind of rift could very easily put Trump in a approval rating in the 30s by the time we get into the first part of the year, which of course doesn't mean anything in the near term if you're looking toward the next election, which is due to happen in 2026. But when you put together these types of developments with what we know is very challenging energy in 2026, it definitely gives room for hope in terms of getting a better result for the Democrats. In the meantime, it's going to be a question of watching, and we have to keep in mind that in January, with Mars returning into Cancer, and it'll be in Cancer for quite some time before it gets back into Leo. It spends most of the spring in Cancer. And Mars in Cancer is a really good reflection of nativist thinking, meaning the idea of isolationism around introducing blockages to immigration, such as legislation being passed. And I'm starting to hear that this is likely to be the first item on the agenda, but I'm guessing that right now the most likely approach the Trump administration would take is to focus on illegal immigration and advocate for legal as being okay. And so then that would cover the Mars and Cancer period, and the idea of the nativism and the sense of, America first and all of that, and we don't want that to be a factor anymore, blah, blah, blah. However, even so, it's an uncomfortable situation because the core Maga group is not in favor of this, and particularly now that they've been egregiously insulted. So we're going to know a lot more, obviously, as this develops, and as we see how Musk deals with the February period, which is pretty much post-inauguration, where the Saturn clicks in and starts to square, which is also a period when Trump himself is challenged in a major way, February and March. And in his case, there are bigger issues in play because of the fact that it connects to his health and well-being as well. And so both of those could happen simultaneously, but the bottom line is that there is a great deal of challenge then. And it'll be very interesting to see how this develops around the role that Musk is going to have in government itself. And remember what I said in a prior video, which is that his major pressure, aside from that February period where Saturn goes through there, comes later in the year when it gets into, or rather it returns to the late degrees of Pisces for a while, and then next year, and by next year now I mean 2026, the real major pressure begins when it starts to square his Sun, his ascendant, gets close to squaring his Mercury, and so on.